Hello everyone attending, and if you're viewing this remotely later, an asynchronous welcome. Thanks for showing up to the second of our Open Ed Week OER Adopter Chats here at UNO. It's part of a series that we're doing this week, sitting down and just kind of having informal conversations with open educational resource adopters at UNO who have moved through the Affordable Content Grant program that we run out of Chris Library, and in cooperation as well with several departments, including digital learning and general education and dual enrollment. So excited to have with us today a couple of OER adopters who have moved through the Affordable Content Grants program. I'll just let you all introduce yourself. If you could just your name, what you teach, and what course you worked on with OER.
Okay, I'll go first. I'm Melanie Seitzer. I'm with English and also the Writing Center. I teach mostly composition, and so Comp 1, and then also we have an ESL class, which is for students who are multilingual, and they take that before they go into Comp 1. And so actually, pardon me, it's a two-part series, but we did the OER for the ESL 2, which is to help prepare students to get into kind of the mainstream comp. And so I did that a couple years ago, transitioning the ESL 2 class to OER with my colleague Kathy Radosta, who is now retired. So it was nice to do it with a partner, I will say, to kind of share kind of part of the labor and also just the brainstorming. So I'll just stop there for now and can say more later.
Yeah, and hi, I'm Steffi Jesseau. I know a lot of you already, and you probably don't need an introduction from me, but I'm from the psychology department. And I don't remember how long it's been since I adopted my open educational resources. It's been a while now. I think I was one of the OGs of that program, and it's still going strong. And yeah, so we just want to, I guess, be here to answer any questions for those of you who are thinking about doing it, because I think it's a pretty good deal for the students. I have a ton of students, and so the cumulative cost that they save in books can be quite enormous over time. So it can be important for them.
Yes, Steffi. Yeah, you were part of the first cohort, actually, spring 2019. So predating even when I got here, because I arrived, in summer 2021. So yeah, it's like you said, part of that OG cohort. Original grant is what that stands for.
Yeah.
I'm stealing that. So again, this is just kind of an informal conversation. So I've got kind of the same set of questions that I'm asking in all of these adopter chats, and just kind of working through your projects, starting with, and this is the first question that I always get from faculty who are either interested in open educational resources or have recently gotten a grant and are ready to start their work. But it's always, where do I find things? How do I start looking, right? So can you just describe your process, whoever wants to go first, for, how did you kind of begin looking for open educational resources to implement into your classes? Did you already have something in mind, or did you kind of cast a wide net and assemble a kind of a draft library of things to work through? How did you approach that?
I can go first. We could just do the same rotation each time so we don't have the weirdness. Okay, so I have a little bit of a foggy brain on this, but I definitely utilize the databases, if that's what you want to call them, Craig, with the open education materials. And so once again, it was for an ESL composition class, which is a little bit more niche than just like a composition 1, right? So there was a ton of materials for the broad, like any type of freshman comp, but then to narrow down into specifically for ESL learners, multilingual students, that started to limit it quite a bit. And so we spent a lot of time browsing in those databases that the library had for us. And then we created an Excel spreadsheet to kind of indicate which things we were actually going to dive into further. And so once again, I did have a partner, so that was, helpful, but we just divided and conquered, like based on our search results. So anything that looked promising, we put it into the spreadsheet, and then we put little bits about, what is it or how it might fit in with what we're looking for. And then we spent time going through and putting in, more columns and more detailed notes. And so that was really helpful, because one thing I feel with searching through pre-existing materials that other faculty members elsewhere have created is it's a little bit daunting sometimes to kind of sift through and figure out what is really good or what fits your needs. And so you have to have some kind of methodology, which I'm sure you all already do in other aspects of your, work life. But if you don't have that, I felt like it was just kind of like a barrage of good possibilities that was tricky to kind of manage. So definitely that was helpful.
So it sounds like in kind of, and that was actually kind of already leading into the next question, but then in sort of doing the vetting of these sources kind of after that initial library was populated, you kind of had a committee of people all working on an Excel sheet then?
Just two of us. So I had a co-grant, whatever whatever that is called. I don't know what that's called, pardon me, but it was me and Kathy Radosta did the grant together. And so we just kind of split it. If you applied for the grant by yourself, then you're kind of on your own with that. But it wouldn't have been unmanageable with one person. I will definitely say that. It was not unmanageable, but it just made it faster for both of us. And the nice thing is that we had kind of co-taught the class before, where we taught it in similar semesters and we did the same curriculum, and we were very familiar with each other's, goals and pedagogy. So that made it easier. If we weren't familiar with each other, I don't know that it would have been, worth it to collaborate on the grant, but we were so familiar.
So with you and Kathy both working on the same Excel sheet, then was it kind of were you both, I guess, for lack of a better word, like voting on a particular material, or were you just kind of trusting each other? Hey, I found this chapter or this part of a text and I think it's pretty good. Check that out. Like, were you also preferring materials to each other?
Yeah, so we did a lot of like working separately and then coming back together. So we'd say like, okay, you look at these 10 materials over the next X amount of days or whatever, and write in the notes. And the notes would always include like, well, what is it? What's actually in there? And then like, what's the quality? And do we feel like how much of it would be usable? Because one thing I quickly realized was certain texts, you might just want like a little bit of it, right? You might want one chapter, or you might want a half of it. You don't necessarily want a whole hog take the entire text. And so we would indicate like what portion of it would be interesting to us. And then if we felt really good about it, usually we would do like a color code, like green is like our faves, right? And you could do that for your own as well. And then when we'd get back together, we'd say like, okay, I really want to show you like a couple of these. And then we would open the text together and look into them. But yeah, some kind of coding, whatever works with your own brain, I think is really beneficial. Like I said, I'm sure you guys are already doing that in other aspects of your work and your research.
Yeah, and to have somebody that you know and have worked with and trust, I think have to be a big help there.
Yeah.
As opposed to but then Steffi, you did yours solo. So
Yeah.
could you talk a little bit about your process for kind of searching for materials and also vetting?
Sure. So I think if I remember correctly, there was some training that went along with the grant, wasn't there?
Yeah, we've got kind of a online workshop that runs people through, from finding sources, including things like accessibility and copyright considerations and things like that.
Right. Yeah. So I just started there and looked at kind of the most popular or biggest receptacles of open educational resources, and psychology, especially intro psychology. There is so much out there. It's crazy. You can just do a Google search on open educational resources, psychology introductory, and it'll come back with a billion things. So it was a little bit hard to narrow it down, but eventually I found two that were pretty good, two sources that I just liked better than the others. And I kind of would draw from each of them to make the chapters. And what's so handy about it is you can, remove stuff. Using a traditional textbook, you'd say, okay, everyone read pages 1 through 12 and then 24 through 33 and that sort of thing. But with this, you can just take out the irrelevant information. You can put all of the chapters right in the order that they need to be in. So, week 1 goes with chapter 1, week 2 goes with chapter 2, and just make it your own. And then I used Pressbooks, which I don't know if anyone here is familiar with. I don't remember very well how to use it, but it wasn't too difficult. And just put all of that in there. And then now I've got just a giant PDF file that serves as their course textbook, and they've got it on the first day and they're ready to go.
Yeah, we're still using Pressbooks, and I think at an increasing rate for a lot of people who are doing these grants, and also just faculty who are reaching out too. For anyone attending or watching this, Pressbooks is an online textbook publishing platform. It's built on WordPress, so you can either do WYSIWYG editing or code if you want to. But it's pretty intuitive, and it has a good look to it. I feel like it kind of has that kind of textbook look to it. And the thing that I really like about Pressbooks too is that it scales really well for mobile, which is of course how a lot of students are consuming their content. So it sounds like then you were just sort of and my next question is about implementation and specifically learning outcomes, but it sounds like you had your week by week kind of outline, and so you were finding materials that worked for that week and then making them fit to the course as you're going along.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. And yeah, that's actually my next question then, is about learning outcomes. So I frequently get responses from faculty that one of the kind of unexpected benefits that they found when they're doing this sort of open educational resources work is that no longer having to follow, the standard textbook, that it allows for a lot more customization of the course. And so you could start with learning outcomes, and you can start with learning objectives and work backwards from there to sort of reach them as you see fit. Is that something that you both found that you were able to do in these projects?
Customization, is that really what you're getting at? Like,
Yeah,
customizing the content to the learning outcomes?
Like work towards the learning outcomes that you specifically want to hit, and then according to the schedule that you want to as well.
Yeah, I would say definitely. So in the ESL composition class, the students write 3 essays, and so we really tried to find good content that lined up with teaching those different forms, like a comparative essay, an argumentative essay, things like that. But then we were able to supplement with our own samples and everything as well. One thing I really liked is that we have a huge vocabulary component for this class, and maybe other disciplines have kind of a similar, like an adjacent component, not vocabulary learning specifically, but some kind of like core concepts, or there's things that have to kind of be memorized. And the thing I like about the vocabulary is that if you're doing an open education model, you could sub in the material like every couple of semesters if you wanted, so that it's not like just kind of out there getting recycled, because the students they're completing like semantic maps for the vocabulary, which is where they fill out all of the metalinguistic terms and everything. And so we liked the ability to, like, we have this thing we want to do. We want to do some vocabulary development, and it's not crucial that it's the same words all the time, right? It's more about, are they learning academic vocabulary? Like, are they learning the vocabulary at a certain level? Doesn't always have to be the same exact words. And so we really like that we could customize, you know, every so often if we wanted to, based on that desire. So to me, that was a big plus.
Yeah.
And then, oh, sorry. I go ahead, Steffi. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no, that's all right. I was just going to talk about my experiences. So, I think a lot of people who've taught intro psych, you know, there are thousands of intro textbooks, and it seems like they'd all be the same, and they usually kind of go in the same order. But when, you know, I got a bunch of them just to look through, the approach they took, they were all very different. And sometimes they would include very different studies, very different concepts, and some were relevant to what I thought was reasonable to teach and some were not. So the customization made it really easy just to take out irrelevant stuff. And I think you can just, for the things I used a thing called OpenStax and another one called Noba. And I think you can just suck the chapters right out and put it directly in textbooks and then just edit it from there. So it's really easy. It's almost like a Word document. And there's, you know, illustrations and things in there that the authors of the other textbooks have put in, which is great because I don't know how to do that, or, you know, find a graph for this certain thing. But yeah, the approaches that the people would take, I'm sort of coming at it from a more biological approach, so I could find materials that are more geared toward that. And that just makes everything more cohesive, I think. So they're not reading a book and getting a different vibe from what they're getting from class.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, and like it leads into it super well. So you did a lot of remixing, it sounds like, you know, sort of. I mean, it is possible, and it has happened that, you know, people find kind of that perfect map, right? And then they're like, I can just use this material instead. But you indicated that you were primarily pulling from a couple of different sources, but then also finding other materials as well. So how much of a time commitment in the development process was this remixing? Because effectively you're creating a new textbook that is drawn from multiple sources, and you're doing it for your own learning outcomes. Was that kind of a major chunk of what ended up being the workload then, was actually sort of making these resources cohesive?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was a lot of work. It was an entire summer.
Yeah.
I just didn't teach that summer, and that's what I did.
I would agree. Kathy and I did most of ours over a winter break, which was a little bit more crunched, and I was happy to have a partner in that situation. We didn't have to only do it that time, but that was just how it lined up. But yeah, I would say you're kind of like, okay, I've narrowed down, here's a bunch of good stuff, but just making sure that's what you really want. And then if you're gonna remix, then are you gonna add in your own things too? You know, are you like your things that you've created, are you going to put that into the file? And there was kind of a lot of that. Kathy has been here for a long time. As I said, she's now retired, but she had a ton of materials that she had created. And so it wasn't only sifting through like the database materials, but it's also like, what do you have that you've created that you might want to, you know, put into a huge PDF as well. And of course you just have to cut it off at some point, but that like kind of the logistics of just going through materials, that does take some time.
And Steffi, so you worked in press books. So one of the things that I like about press books too is that you know, because you're working on sort of like a chapter by chapter object kind of workflow, is that it's pretty easy to go back in and do updates, add material, make refinements. Have you found that you've been able to do that a lot with the materials in your courses, or did you really need to? make any kind of subsequent revisions and changes to the text that you made? How's that workflow been for you since then?
Yeah, I haven't done that yet, just due to lack of time. It's a lot of work to put the whole thing together. It's a lot of work to see what needs to be updated. And then my class, I compare. So I teach intro psych. There's 9 sections of it. And then I always have one other class that's an upper level 4,000 level class. And I think of them as like a speedboat and then like the Titanic or something, where intro psych is like the Titanic. And if you need to change something somewhere, a lot of things need to get changed in the lectures, in the homework, in the exams, in the in-class materials and things like that. So I don't take changes in that one lightly. Whereas in my other classes, I can just, oh, the day before, oh yeah, I'll just put this in. Look, I just saw this new thing, and that's fun. So yeah, I've gone in and fixed a few things here and there, but nothing substantive that would make any difference. And I think I did talk to you about maybe having another grant for that purpose, because it is hard to find a good chunk of time to be able to do that.
Yeah, yeah, and I really like that we're having this conversation, because that's often a it's, the likelihood, like I said, like it can happen, of just sort of like, oh, I found this perfect sort of OER textbook, right? It can happen, but the majority of the time it ends up being a lot of remixing, a lot of customization, and it can be a huge time commitment, because effectively you're creating a new textbook specific to your course, which is great because you can sort of achieve that level of customization and you can make the course exactly how you want it. But it's like you said, it was an entire summer that you didn't teach and you just spent doing that. So I think that's a really good example. And then Melanie, you mentioned that you were grabbing a hard copy earlier before the meeting started.
Yes. So a lot of the students in ESL 2 are like refugees or first gen, similar situations. And so we are always cognizant that they may have limited computer access or limited Wi-Fi access. And so we felt really strongly that we didn't want to just make it a PDF and always have to rely on that, right? And additionally, some of these students have pretty low literacies, and through no fault of their own, right? That's just why they're in the class, to work on that. And so we feel that the physical copy helps to build their literacy skills a little bit better. Anyway, I'm kind of preaching to the choir, but so we also made bound physical versions of the book. We have the benefit that the students who are in that class, there's, I don't know the 100% logistics, but there's some kind of fee, and that like maybe a technology fee, and it goes into a pot, and for a little bit that pot didn't do anything, right? And so there's only a couple sections of this class, and the way it is now, like there's enough in that pot to pay to print the PDFs for the students, so they're never paying anything. We're basically just printing the materials. So we went through the UNMC printing, and they even were able to do the beautiful spiral, which I highly recommend. If you ever print anything, the spiral is the way to go, because the staples will not do it. And the students love that. So like I'm in a different situation than Steffi, because if there were 9 sections, it'd be kind of a little bit of a different animal. But there's only a couple of sections. So if anybody on this Zoom, if you're thinking of doing it and it's kind of only for a few sections, or maybe your pot is bigger and you really, really want a physical thing, I just want to say that it's possible. And once you have the file, the UNMC printing services are just like so easy, and they will even deliver it directly to your office. You just have to have the like the pay number that your department is using. So I know everybody's situations are going to be different, and that's not possible in some scenarios, but I did just want to point out that that's what we did, because we were like, we want to do OER, but we don't want it to just live on the computer, because these students don't thrive that way. They really need physical stuff. And then if, I don't know if anyone on the chat is in a class where like you have to do math problems or you have to do something by hand, right? Then if you want that, then a physical version allows you to be able to have that, right? Because then if the worksheets or whatever the case may be, could be in there too. So that was really nice because we would do a lot of in-class work and it was like, just get out your book, you know, just treat it like a regular book. And they really appreciated that.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point, and it's one that I don't hear sort of discussed as often when talking about open educational resources. But obviously, sort of, you know, the guiding, I guess, ideology behind it is that we want to remove barriers to access, right? And but there's still a technological barrier to access that is often present, right?
Yeah.
And so sometimes removing the barrier for access can mean returning to a print edition, right? Because we
Yeah.
just sort of assume, I think, that everyone just has all of the internet all of the time now, and that's not necessarily the case. And then, of course, there's also what you were talking about too, sort of, you know, the by nature of your class and the kinds of students who are in it, the reason that they're in it, there can be a literacy barrier to access too. So simply sort of being able to provide, here it is, and it's online, often doesn't do it. And then Steffi, and I had meant to bring this up at the beginning, but Steffi still holds the honor of her OER work has had the greatest financial impact of any single project at UNO, and it's not close. You're currently sitting at, I just went and looked it up, $387,000 in cumulative student savings, because
Oh my God.
a lot of students.
Wow,
So
that's amazing. Can we just like have a clap for that? Oh
I
my
know,
God.
right? Yeah. So Steffi, I mean, obviously you teach a lot of students. So, you know, how often have you encountered this idea of there being kind of subsequent sort of like access issues, or has that not been something that you have encountered a lot? I was just thinking that by nature of the fact that you've taught so many students in this course that you've converted, what have been your experiences with that?
Mostly fine.
Mhm.
Most of them don't care, and if anything, a lot of people with accommodations want digital copies of things so that, you know, a screen reader can read it and whatever. I have had a few people from accessibility services say that they want a physical copy, and I don't know how they do that. I assume they just go there and print it out. My PDF is about 600 pages, so it's quite a bit of printing for them, and that would get quite expensive. So I think accessibility services just kind of took care of that for me on the occasions that someone needed a physical copy, but it does occasionally happen.
I think we have someone from accessibility services here. Yeah. Aaron, did you want to weigh on that? What's that process?
Oh, I am not officially with accessibility services, but my guess would be that they may end up printing stuff. I'm not sure. Um, I know that some students do better with having things printed. Just for, and I apologize for our little friend here today. Some students do better with print stuff, and I'll tell you that I do better with print things sometimes myself. If a student would need to have it printed, they may just print it there in their office, or they may send it to UNMC themselves to have it printed. I can tell you that yes, indeed, for some accommodations, having it in digital format is going to be easier because of the screen readers, because of being able to have the print much larger for some vision issues. Having the material in a digital format natively is going to make it easier in a lot of different ways. So I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with what accommodation would require it to be able to be printed. But I guess it doesn't surprise me necessarily.
I mean, it could just be like, again, like a technology access issue. And yes, not accessibility services. I know, sorry, I misspoke, but
Oh, no, that's
we,
okay. We have
So
our meeting this afternoon. That might be what it is.
yes. So Aaron and I are both on the accessibility working group, and then I had seen that calendar thing pop up, and so that just kind of triggered the A word in my head. Sorry to put you on the spot there, but thank you for showing us your lovely cat.
No worries. He's always happy to make an appearance.
When it comes to another question that I had was in terms of student feedback. So yesterday we had a student panel in which a couple of Nebraska system students kind of gave their feedback on their experiences. Have y'all received much in the way of student feedback as far as this new modality that you're teaching in? And if so, kind of what's the tenor generally been?
My ESL students love it because they love to just be told, here's your book, and you don't have to do anything else for the book. So as you guys know, if you have books in any of your classes, is just, a bump in the road for them. I do also post a digital file to Canvas on our homepage. And so I always appreciate having both. And I'll say, like, if you left your book, no big deal, like pull it up, pull it up on the classroom computers. Often I'm in a classroom with computers, but the students really like it, and they like the ease that they're able to access the material and that they can write all over it. We're doing a lot of annotating, and they don't have to worry, even though we tell them, if you bought the textbook, you can highlight it, you can annotate it. They're still hesitant. We know that, right? Because they're worried they're not going to be able to resell it, or I don't know, all of the logistics anymore. But I think just the idea of like, this is yours, I don't need it back ever, is kind of nice. So yeah, I would say that the reaction has been positive in my class.
Okay, so I don't want to pick on freshmen here, but I don't think they quite know what to expect. So I don't think they understand it, or understand that it's not common. They're just like, oh, this is my class, and here's what we do. And I expected a greater response, I guess, in student evaluations or whatever once I made the switch. But then again, there aren't students who took it with the book and then took it without the book to say, oh, this is much better. So they just get there. It's their first semester usually of college. They're like, what am I doing? And then, I do have one teaching assistant who makes sure to point that out on the first day. He's like, yeah, she went through the trouble of making this textbook for you. It's free for you. It's online whenever you need it. Consider that a gift. And so I'm glad for my one TA who makes sure to point that out. But otherwise, I think the students aren't aware of the potential impact. I know they're happy that they don't have to buy a book. I've heard that for sure.
I wonder if often, with sort of particularly like first semester incoming, first year college students, right? Then transitioning out of the high school mode where they often had their text provided anyway. It's just something that they feel is normal. Yeah. Sorry, Melanie, you were about to say something. I interrupted you.
Oh, no, I was just going to ask Steffi if you had a physical textbook before the OER, because I know a lot of people are going to e-textbooks from mainstream publishers. So I just wondered what you had before, and if you feel like there were any changes in their engagement with the texts, if you could remember your prior and then, the OER.
Yeah, so I did have a textbook that could be ordered, like rented online, or you could buy a physical copy, and it was fairly expensive. I think now I looked it up recently, it's $189 for that text. And as far as the students go, I'm losing my train of thought. Am I answering your question? Hold on.
Well, so I just asked if you felt like they engaged with it.
Right.
The worry, and I'm coming from English where everyone likes physical stuff, right? But the worry often around here is like, if you go to just digital only, they're not going to read it. They're not going to annotate it and read actively. They're not going to, whatever. So I just wondered if you had thoughts on their engagement with the book before and after.
Sure. So what I do know is that more of them have access to the book, and that's about all I know. The textbook was never required anyway. It was an adjunct. So now I know for certain that everyone has access to it. And I do hear from students who talk about reading the textbook. My TAs will say, if you're having trouble and not understanding something, go ahead and go back to the textbook and that sort of thing. But I don't have any data to support their engagement before versus after or anything like that. But I do know a lot of people just didn't get it before.
So you can really only go up from there.
Yeah, true.
So I did also want to ask you both. Speaking to faculty and instructors who are considering sort of OER adoption and undertaking this kind of project, what is your best piece of advice that you have gleaned from your own experiences in doing this?
Best advice. I got to think for a second.
Don't worry.
Mine is just that it's going to take way longer than you think.
Mm-hmm.
And give yourself plenty of time.
Yeah, this is a gripe, not advice. So I'll try to get to advice in a second. The gripe is that the logistics of making it into one file is much more time consuming than we would prefer, especially because this has only half of like OER stuff and the other half is R stuff. And so we indicated like on the front, like these pages are, whatever the license is from this text, and then the rest is like our stuff. And so subsequently that second half is 1 million individual files. And so yeah, the logistics is like not my favorite, but it's very rewarding when that's done. And so I would say, okay, the question was best piece of advice. I think Steffi's kind of hit on this, like there's a lot of stuff available, but make it chosen based on what you are trying to actually teach, not like, oh, this is really cool, or this is, not that you guys would do that, but there's, it's kind of like tempting sometimes. You're like, whoa, this is a really cool material or whatever. But to start with your class objectives and start with what you're trying to do, and then try to find things that work with that rather than the opposite, right? Rather than just seeing what's out there and then teaching to what you find, which nobody would do that, but your brain kind of gets a little confused sometimes when you're searching. So when you're searching, it's like, I want to find what I already need. And if I find something else cool that might work, as a small component, great. But we don't need to like change our curriculum or anything to fit something new, if that makes sense. Like I said, people know that, but your brain just gets a little confused when you're looking at cool new things.
Well, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and go into the chat here. We do have a couple questions. So Connie wanted to know if we know what percentage of gen ed classes are using OER resources at UNO. I don't have a number for that off the top of my head. I was looking at about 1.5 years ago, I did kind of an initial report about gen ed and one tag, so both no cost and low cost engagement, with an eye to figuring out how feasible a pathway through the gen ed curriculum would be. And even at the time then, we were very close to at least having a technical pathway, if not sort of a viable one, viable meaning to allow for enough freedom of scheduling and freedom of interest to really make it useful. Then, of course, it's kind of been in a holding pattern since then as the gen ed curriculum project is ongoing. And I know that the university is looking at revising that. But we have since had quite a few additional courses that I know meet that tagging requirement. In particular, we've made a lot of movement into fine arts and humanities tagged gen ed courses that now meet a one tagging requirement. And as I understand it, the gen ed curriculum will probably have fewer required credits. So my guess would be that we are even closer now than we were to a viable pathway, and will probably more so when the new one is announced. But as far as sort of like a percentage number, I don't know that off the top of my head. Sorry. Colton asked, any insight regarding OER in K through 12? Wondering if if it's an upcoming trend option. So Steffi, Psych 1010 is also a dual enrollment course, right?
Yeah, it is.
Have there been any conversations regarding sort of the high school credit side of the courses, and kind of potentially using open educational resources, or is that not a group that you work on?
Not really. I haven't had any conversations about that. And mostly I've got middle college students,
Mhm.
the ones in high school. Yeah. And I've got those students, we generally don't talk about the context of the textbook, and none of them have said anything to me. But I'm sure it could be adopted in K through 12. Why not? It's whatever the individual teacher wants to do.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Craig. The point of curiosity, it peaked when it was mentioned earlier. I was wondering, it was one of the barriers, or maybe learning curves for students who are first time in college, student or learners right out of the 16 to 18 range, typical. And so that was one of the things that might be a barrier for use and familiarity with using a variety of tools like OER. So I was just curious, Brass Department of Education has their own series of information on OER resources and adjacent tools. So I was just curious if anything it kind of came up in some of the research you do.
I can kind of give you some insight from a project I've been working on. So I had been talking with Derek Nero over in TED for a while about the possibility of a cross-institution dual enrollment conversion. His feedback was, and it's only recently come together, and that I think we're actually going to be working on a press book for their dual enrollment, for a dual enrollment TED course. But part of the issue was that it is not as simple often in high schools to implement a textbook as it is at the collegiate level, just because of faculty freedom of a faculty member can decide what they're teaching. And then often in the K through 12 side of things, there are teaching standards that it has to be aligned with, and then it has to go through kind of subsequent approvals. So I know that is kind of an additional barrier to access. And like I said, it's taken us nearly 2 years now just to kind of get a project in place that looks like it could work. And then Melanie, I don't know, is your teaching English as a second language course, is that dual enrollment?
No, it's not. I think our Comp 1, some students maybe take Comp as dual enrollment, but no, the ESL classes are not.
Yeah, it's a difficult kind of thing to work with, because, well, one, there's often those additional kind of barriers to adoption, or not barriers, but just sort of approval. I want to say barrier, but like additional approvals that it has to go through. And then also, it requires working with teachers who are outside of, the institution that I'm working in. But I mean, if you go on OER Commons and you do a search and then you limit it to K-12, there's so much material now. I mean, I don't think the amount of material is a barrier in and of itself. I just don't have as much familiarity with K through 12 implementation. So sorry, that was as good of an answer as I could come up with, Colton. Okay, any other? And Connie said, that's great, thanks. Leaving for a gen ed meeting. There you go. Cool. Any last questions from our attendees? Or final thoughts from our presenters? Or conversation partners, I guess I could call you today. All right, great. Well, I want to thank you both again for your willingness to come and share with us today. I will be recording this, or I am recording this, but I'll be posting it as a video afterwards so people can attend asynchronously. But if whether you're attending live or asynchronously, I hope you found some useful takeaways here in learning from this experience. So Steffi and Melanie, thank you so much again for your work, and it was rad to see a couple examples of people who have not only done the conversions but also quite a bit of content creation as well, which these projects often end up involving. So it was great to hear from you and your experiences about that. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you, everyone.
Yep.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Craig.
Going to end.